Have you ever found yourself in a situation where um, you just desperately wanted a change in your life?
Oh, yeah, I think we all have.
Right. Like maybe you're sitting at a job you have completely outgrown.
Or you're just stuck in this daily routine that completely drains your energy.
Exactly. And you spend your time daydreaming, thinking that if you just had a little more time or maybe more autonomy,
You could finally hit your stride?
yes, you are essentially just waiting for an exit door to open. But then the crazy thing happens.
The door actually opens.
The door opens. The opportunity for real, tangible change is sitting right there in front of you. And instead of walking through it,
You freeze.
you completely freeze, you hesitate.
Yes.
Suddenly you find dozens of reasons why staying exactly where you are might actually be the better option.
It's so common.
It is. And if you have ever experienced that sudden paralysis in the face of opportunity, you are going to want to hear what we are covering today.
It really is a phenomenon that creates a massive amount of cognitive dissonance for people.
Yeah, cognitive dissonance is the perfect way to describe it.
Because today we are going to examine the psychological friction between that human craving for freedom and our deeply ingrained addiction to predictability.
And our sole source text for today's deep dive is an excerpt from a really thought-provoking piece. It's called The Freedom Paradox, Choosing Alignment Over Familiarity.
It's a fantastic text. And our goal today is to really dissect this piece. We want to extract its core arguments about why that hesitation occurs when the door opens.
Right, why do we freeze?
Exactly. And more importantly, what the text suggests it actually takes to finally move forward.
So the text establishes this foundational premise right out of the gate, which is that humans consistently hold freedom up as one of our highest desires.
We all want the ability to shape our lives according to our own values.
But yet, when the opportunity to claim that autonomy actually appears, we pull back. Okay, let's unpack this. Because the text doesn't just point out the hesitation. It actually attempts to diagnose the underlying mechanics of it.
And the core argument there centers on the idea that freedom fundamentally carries uncertainty.
Right.
Whereas security, even if it's in a highly flawed environment, offers predictability.
Predictability. Yeah, the author is really tapping into how the human mind processes environmental variables.
We know from a biological standpoint that humans are wired to adapt to patterns.
Right.
A predictable environment requires very little cognitive energy to navigate.
Because you already know the rules.
You know the rules, you know the limitations, you know the outcomes.
You don't have to think about it.
Exactly. Uncertainty, on the other hand, demands constant cognitive vigilance.
Every single unknown variable requires processing power. You have to figure out if it's a threat.
Yes. So when the text argues that we choose security over freedom, it's pointing out that we are essentially choosing cognitive conservation over cognitive load.
It's the drafty house analogy.
Oh, I love that analogy.
It's so relatable. You might absolutely hate the house you live in because it's cramped, the roof leaks.
It's drafty.
Right. But you have memorized exactly which floorboards creak. You know how to navigate it in the dark.
You know all its flaws.
Exactly. So if someone hands you the keys to a brand new mansion, but it's pitch black inside,
You're terrified.
you're likely to freeze, simply because the fear of stumbling around in an unfamiliar layout actually overrides the promise of a better home.
The mind prefers a known limitation to an unknown variable.
It's wild to think about it that way.
The text makes this point explicitly, actually. It argues that the known environment, no matter how imperfect or even stifling it might be, registers as safe to the primitive parts of our brain.
Just because we've survived it so far.
Precisely. We survived it yesterday, so it's safe today.
The unknown path represents an untested variable. And from a purely evolutionary standpoint, the mind interprets untested variables as potential threats.
So the author isn't framing this hesitation as a personal failing.
Not at all. It's not a lack of willpower. It's framed as the mind doing exactly what it was designed to do, which is prioritize survival through the identification of predictable patterns. But let's look at this critically for a second. If we are biologically wired to just avoid the unknown, how does the text account for the fact that staying in a limiting environment can actually be destructive long-term?
That's the real catch, isn't it?
Right, because we aren't just talking about a mild inconvenience here. People stay in deeply unfulfilling or even toxic situations for years.
Decades, sometimes.
Does the text suggest the brain just ignores that long-term damage in favor of short-term predictability.
What's fascinating here is the specific term the text introduces to capture that exact tension. It calls it the freedom paradox.
The freedom paradox.
Right. And this paradox is defined as the human tendency to desire freedom in theory while deeply fearing the responsibility that accompanies it in practice.
In theory versus in practice. That is a huge distinction.
It really is. The text argues that the brain doesn't necessarily ignore the long-term damage of a limiting environment. Rather, it weighs that slow, predictable damage against the immediate, acute demands of taking total responsibility for a new path.
And more often than not, the brain decides the slow damage is just the easier burden to carry.
Because it's a known burden.
Right. Because in theory, freedom sounds purely additive. It sounds like gaining time, gaining options, getting more of what you want.
But the practice of freedom, according to this text, is actually about taking on a massive amount of weight.
It really breaks down the specific demands of true freedom. And the list is heavily focused on the burden of choice.
Decision-making.
Exactly. It argues that freedom requires constant decision-making and a very high tolerance for uncertainty. It also emphasizes the necessity of stepping outside of the scripts that society provides.
And those societal scripts serve a very specific cognitive function, which ties right back to our earlier point about predictability.
Right. What does a script actually do for us?
Well, a script, whether it's the traditional path of education, a standard corporate career ladder, or even just the expected milestones of adulthood, it's a pre-packaged set of decisions.
You don't have to invent the wheel.
Exactly. If you follow the script, the heavy lifting of figuring out what to do with your life is largely done for you.
Go to school, get a job, buy a house.
Yes. The text asserts that stepping outside of those scripts means you no longer have a predetermined structure to lean on. Every single action, every priority, every boundary, it all has to be actively generated by you.
Which brings up the issue of decision fatigue. The text leans heavily into this.
Oh, absolutely.
When you operate within a highly structured environment, your daily choices are severely limited.
What time you arrive, what tasks you perform, when you leave.
They are all mandated. But if you suddenly step into total autonomy, your day becomes a completely blank canvas.
And having to actively decide how to paint that canvas every single hour of every single day requires a staggering amount of cognitive effort.
It seems the text is arguing that we really underestimate how exhausting freedom actually is.
It is exhausting.
Yeah.
And it's also deeply isolating.
How so?
Well, when you follow a societal script and things go wrong, the text points out that you have a built-in scapegoat. Oh, that is so true.
Right. You can blame the rigid corporate structure or the flawed educational system,
The economy, your boss.
the unfair expectations of your community. The script absorbs the blame.
Wow.
But the moment you choose true freedom, you forfeit that scapegoat. If you forge your own path and you stumble, the responsibility falls entirely on your own shoulders.
You own the failures without any buffer.
You do.
Yeah.
And the text highlights this massive shift in responsibility as the primary reason the freedom paradox exists. The fear of unmitigated failure keeps people anchored to the script.
I want to push back on the framing of these scripts for a second, though.
Sure.
Because the text treats societal scripts almost as a trap you have to escape. But aren't these scripts highly functional?
In what way?
Well, society provides them because they generally work to maintain order. They provide a baseline of security for the vast majority of people. If everyone just stepped off the script simultaneously, wouldn't that just be utter chaos?
Undoubtedly. So does the text acknowledge the utility of these structures at all? Or does it view them purely as obstacles to individual freedom?
No, it definitely doesn't dismiss the utility of scripts for society at large. It's actually focusing strictly on the cost to the individual who feels misaligned with them.
The individual cost.
Right. The author concedes that scripts provide really important safety nets and social approval. If you follow the expected path, you receive validation from your peers, your family, your culture.
People nod and smile when you tell them what you do.
Exactly. The obstacle only arises when an individual's internal values no longer match that external script.
When the shoe doesn't fit anymore.
Yes. The text argues that maintaining a script that actively contradicts your internal values requires a different kind of psychological toll. It's a slow erosion of self.
So the choice isn't really between a safe script and a dangerous freedom.
No.
The choice is between the systemic friction of the script and the personal friction of autonomy.
That's a great way to put it.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the text eventually pivots from analyzing the paralysis to explaining how people actually break out of it.
Right, it doesn't just leave us stuck there.
Exactly. It doesn't just leave us staring at a wall of insurmountable responsibility. It identifies a very specific tipping point.
The catalyst.
The text argues that individuals finally step through that door when their curiosity eventually becomes stronger than their fear.
And notice the phrasing the author uses there. The text does not suggest that the fear of uncertainty ever disappears.
The fear is still there.
The biological aversion to the unknown, that psychological weight of responsibility we talked about, they remain constant. The shift happens entirely on the other side of the scale.
The curiosity side.
Right, the internal drive of curiosity, that burning need to know what happens if you actually try. It just simply grows until it outweighs the baseline fear.
It's a recalibration of priorities.
Exactly, rather than the elimination of anxiety. You're still anxious, you're just more curious.
And once that scale tips, the text outlines a phase of active experimentation. It says these individuals move away from just theorizing about freedom, and they begin testing it in the real world.
They start doing the work.
And the author categorizes this experimentation into 3 distinct arenas: new paths, new structures, and new identities. Let's spend some time on these because they represent the actual mechanics of change.
Okay, let's break them down.
Experimenting with new paths seems the most externally visible one. We're talking about rerouting a career, maybe moving to a new city, or fundamentally altering the trajectory of a relationship.
Yes, the new path is the physical manifestation of stepping off the script. But the text is very careful to note that changing the path is insufficient on its own if it isn't supported by the second arena, which is new structures.
Right, because of what we said earlier, we need patterns.
We absolutely have to have patterns to conserve cognitive energy. So if you abandon the societal script, you create a vacuum.
A huge void.
You no longer have the 9-to-5 schedule or the predefined milestones guiding your behavior.
You don't have a boss telling you when to eat lunch.
Right. So the text argues that individuals who successfully navigate freedom immediately begin experimenting with building their own custom structures.
They become their own architects.
They have to. They have to design their own daily rhythms, their own systems of accountability, their own metrics for success, just to replace the ones they left behind.
That structural void is where I imagine a lot of people retreat. Like, if you quit the draining job, but you fail to build a new structure for your days, that blank canvas we talked about earlier quickly turns into a very overwhelming chaos.
It's a recipe for burnout, ironically.
It makes total sense that the text emphasizes the proactive building of new scaffolding. But it's the third arena of experimentation that feels like the heaviest lift by far.
The identity piece.
Yes, experimenting with new identities. Changing what you do is one thing, but changing how you define yourself seems infinitely more complex.
The text actually treats identity as the core anchor of the freedom paradox, because our identities are so deeply entangled with the scripts we follow.
We define ourselves by our roles.
The dependable employee, the pragmatic planner, the person who plays it safe. These labels provide a sense of self-concept that is easily understood by the world.
It tells people how to interact with us.
Exactly. So to experiment with a new identity requires the willingness to let a known version of yourself die.
That's heavy.
It is.
Yeah.
You are entering a transitional phase where you are no longer who you were, but you aren't entirely sure who you are becoming yet. The text suggests this existential gray area is the most intense form of uncertainty a person can endure.
It's essentially deciding to rewrite the core code of your operating system while the computer is still running.
That is a perfect metaphor.
You are stripping away the labels that gave you context in your community. And that creates a massive point of friction, not just internally, but interpersonally.
Oh, massive.
Because when you start shedding those old identities and experimenting with new paths and new structures, you inherently change how you interface with the people around you.
You change the rules of engagement?
Which leads directly to how the text contrasts the internal experience of this change with the external perception of it.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the author provides a really crucial framework for understanding that interpersonal friction. The text draws a sharp line between how stepping off the script looks to an observer versus how it feels to the participant.
The two views are completely different.
Radically different. From the outside to family members, friends, or colleagues who are still operating within those familiar societal scripts, this experimentation looks like sheer recklessness.
Yeah, it looks crazy.
They see an individual abandoning a secure, predictable environment and stepping into unmapped territory. And because the observers are still prioritizing security themselves, they interpret the individual's actions as a massive, unnecessary risk.
Because the observers are essentially looking at the drafty house analogy from the driveway.
Yes.
They see you walking out of a house that is still standing, going straight into the pitch black of the unknown, and they think you have literally lost your mind.
They project their own fear of the unknown right onto your actions.
From the outside, true freedom just looks like a chaotic dismantling of everything that makes sense. It looks like you are just inviting failure.
Exactly. The external perception is framed entirely around the concept of risk and potential loss. But then the text pivots to the internal reality of the person actually going through the process.
The person in the dark.
Right. The author argues that from the inside, to the person who has allowed curiosity to tip the scales, the person who has taken on the burden of their own choices, the experience does not feel like a chaotic risk at all.
What does it feel like?
It feels like alignment.
Alignment. That word seems to be the linchpin of the whole text.
It absolutely is.
It's the counterweight to the burden of responsibility we've been talking about. The text isn't saying that stepping into the unknown is easy or that the fear completely goes away, but it is saying that the internal congruence, that feeling that your external actions finally match your internal values, is a far more stable foundation than the false security of a script you hate.
It's authentic stability.
It's like building your own vehicle from scratch.
Yeah.
To a spectator, it looks incredibly dangerous to drive. But to the person behind the wheel, who understands every single bolt they tightened, it feels like absolute control.
That internal stability is the reward for enduring the friction of the freedom paradox.
The payoff.
The text posits that alignment is the state where the heavy cognitive load of decision-making and the anxiety of uncertainty are actually neutralized by a profound sense of authenticity.
Please stop fighting yourself.
You are no longer wasting energy trying to fit yourself into a shape that doesn't suit you. The risk of the unknown is mitigated by the certainty of knowing you are operating on your own terms.
So what does this all mean? We have looked at the biological drive for predictability, the heavy demands of decision-making and autonomy, that critical tipping point of curiosity, and the profound difference between how risk looks and how alignment feels.
We've covered a lot of ground.
When we synthesize all these concepts from the source text, what is the definitive takeaway regarding this tension we all face?
The author distills the entire philosophical and psychological argument into one concluding premise. The exact moment someone makes the active choice of alignment over familiarity is the very moment their life begins to change.
Active choice being the key phrase.
Yes. The text wants to make it perfectly clear that change is not a passive event. It does not occur simply because an opportunity presents itself or because a door opens.
It's not going to happen to you.
No. The transformation happens exclusively in the conscious, often deeply uncomfortable decision to embrace the responsibility of the unknown rather than defaulting to the comfort of the script.
It demands an active participant. The door opening means absolutely nothing if you refuse to cross the threshold.
You have to walk through it.
As we wrap up this analysis, we want to turn the lens directly onto you listening to this right now. Evaluate the landscape of your own current routines and frustrations. Where in your life are you choosing a limiting familiar pattern simply because the unknown path demands too much active decision-making?
It's a tough question to ask yourself.
Are there areas where you desire freedom in theory, but are actively avoiding the heavy responsibility of it in practice?
Answering those questions requires confronting your own defaults, which is never a comfortable exercise.
No, not.
To leave you with a final thought to mull over something that builds on the text's analysis of societal structures, consider this. If society provides these scripts specifically to prioritize predictable security over true chaotic freedom, then perhaps your hesitation to change isn't a personal flaw at all.
That's an interesting angle.
Perhaps it isn't a lack of courage. Perhaps it is exactly how the system was designed to function, keeping us predictable and in our designated places. Which raises a really critical question for you to examine. Are you actually living your own life, or are you just flawlessly reciting a script you never auditioned for?
That is the exact question you have to answer before you can decide whether or not to walk through the door. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We hope this breakdown of the freedom paradox provides a useful framework for interrogating your own choices and structures. Keep analyzing those familiar patterns. Keep testing the boundaries of your own curiosity. And we will be here to explore the next set of ideas with you on the next deep dive.